Well, we did all the things you would do in the natural. We brought our people to worship retreats and worship events. We brought guests in that we felt embodied the culture that we really wanted to see in our church. We did all those things, which are really good to do. But then what we did is we gave ourselves to prayer and preaching and modeling and just going places in worship with whoever we could find. We kind of call them a tribe, the worship tribe in our church, people that were desperate for more in worship and more of the presence of Jesus. And we built the culture that way. And in Colossians, Paul writes about filling up the sufferings of Christ. And I think for pastors of churches who are looking to birth in partnership with the Holy Spirit any type of culture, whether it's healing, worship, anything like that, there will be suffering and there'll be opposition. And in very small ways, we're breaking through barriers and almost filling up some of those sufferings. So we faced opposition, and the biggest thing that I would say we had to do was keep going when we didn't believe it was going to work, when we had to keep going through lots of disappointments. We had to keep going when we thought we were just completely messing it up. And basically for us it was about perseverance. We had to persevere long enough and overcome opposition and stand in faith for it and call our people to do that. But I think that's what pastors and leaders do. They reach out into the future and invite people to come and live in the land, in the promised land. And that comes at a price, and it's a small price in comparison. But we had to do it and we had to pay it. Small obediences add up to big impact, I think. And so the biggest thing was just over time, everything we possibly could to see the culture we felt the Lord was giving us be birthed in worship in our church. And we still have a long way to go.
I don't really do programs and structures very well. That's not really the way that I'm wired. Part of my story is I grew up in a missionary family and we moved around and we lived in different cultures. And so, and being a creative person, I'm not really wired for systems and structures or programs necessarily, but I do culture. And the thing about culture is when is a culture finished? A culture continues to grow and evolve. So the question of building a worship culture, we're still in that journey. That journey hasn't stopped. And I think what Andy said about perseverance is really true. They say that it takes someone 7 years to learn a language fluently. And so I think sometimes we just want things so quickly and so instantly. And yet that's not the reality of what it takes to build a culture and to do it with people over years and over a lifetime. And the other thing I would say is that sometimes our vision is too small for worship. And I love that in the Vineyard we don't do hype and we don't elevate our worship leaders and we don't make a big deal about our profile or anything. But maybe sometimes the downside of that is that we, whilst we don't want to put worship on a pedestal, we do want to embody and live out that worship is our highest priority on the earth, just as it will be one day in heaven. And so as we continue to build a culture, we're continuing to lean into that over years. And with our people, we talked about Moses and Bezalel last night as we were teaching on worship and the presence of God. And there was Moses who contended for the presence of God. And he pretty much said to God, unless you go with me, I'm not going. And then there was this amazing craftsman called Bezalel who was in charge of constructing the tabernacle. And I love the partnership between Bezalel and Moses. And I think that is a model for us as well. And worship leading and worship culture building is not just for our worship leaders. We as senior pastors, senior leaders of our churches, we are the chief worshipers, and we need to contend for the presence of God in our worship with our worship teams. And that's one thing I would love to see more of in our movement, is our pastors leaning into that with our worship leaders together, and that partnership, that sacred space of the relationships and the teams working together to craft and to build and to shape and to influence and to make disciples and to see the kingdom come. That's a really beautiful experience, and that's been our story. We've had our hardships, but we've also really loved seeing people come alive in the presence of God, coming into their own as worship leaders, and beginning to carry the culture themselves, beginning within that culture to find their own voice. It's a really fun journey. It's a really fun journey to see diversity, diverse gifts, diverse callings spring up in your community. And we wouldn't want to miss out on that. So that's the journey that we're embarking on. We're still on it. We're still building a culture.